Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to this episode number 61 of the Higher Ed Geek podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. This episode is with Karen Costa. Really appreciate her taking some time out. It's just a kind of serendipitous social media connection. I've seen her pretty active on Twitter talking all things online and digital education. So really kind of stuck out to me and appreciated kind of her thoughts on that topic. So I wanted to bring her on the show and kind of share her out with everybody and get to know her a little bit better myself. So really enjoyed this conversation. She's a really great person doing great work. So I'm glad that we could connect and share out all the cool stuff that she's doing and kind of geeking out about. So definitely connect with her and all the things that we mentioned down in the show notes as per usual. But without further ado, this is episode number 61 with Karen Costa. Well, yeah, we'll go ahead and dive in here. Appreciate you, Karen, making some time for the show here. We're excited to talk with you. I've kind of just, I feel like it's neat when I kind of stumble across really cool and interesting people on social media, and then I'm just like, I would like to talk with you, and just being able to make time for that and kind of record and share it out, because I think it'll be helpful to other folks. But yeah, I mean, we'll start off as we always do. If you just want to give a quick introduction of yourself and your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I'm definitely a higher ed geek, so I fit right in. I don't know how quick my professional journey is, but I'll do my best to summarize. I attended Syracuse for my undergrad and majored in sociology there, and that was kind of by default. So I was a little bit unsure of my next steps after college, and eventually landed in a college access program in Providence, Rhode Island, helping students gain access to college. So we were working with students on things like college applications, FAFSA, supporting them in their high schools. And that is when I hooked into higher ed as a career. I fell in love with that work. We were taking students to college campuses on college visits. And I loved working with my students and helping them, but I really loved being on a college campus. So I decided to go back and did my master's at UMass in higher education. And after I graduated from there, started working in a community college. And I was there for about 6 years, doing a lot of admin work, but I was also teaching at the same time. I think that's something that's sort of been unique in my career, is that I have that admin experience, but I've also always taught. So very much, I hope, building bridges between student affairs and academic affairs in my career. After about 6 years, I had a little one at home, and the center could not hold. So I ended up leaving that full-time position, and that's when I started working remotely, which time flew. That was about 8 years ago. So I've been teaching fully online since then. I've been doing a lot of writing, and I also do a lot of faculty development work. So that's where I am today, fully remote, and sort of that, as I mentioned to you before, multi-hyphen career. And I would say writer, teacher, faculty development would be the sort of three main categories of that journey.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'm also fully remote in a admin role, just like supporting online programs for a campus. And I think, it increasingly, I think just, generally for places recruiting good talent, I think they're going to, be more remote, and certainly with the development of online courses and different things. And like, I work a lot with success coaches, and if you have students in online programs at different times, it's just like, it's just really interesting, I think, where a lot of people wouldn't think higher ed work would start to get more distributed that way, that folks like you and then just a myriad of other roles are starting to kind of go in that direction. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I guess, you said that you're, I guess, like maybe if it was like the major or where you went, which is kind of like a default option for you for like undergrad, but it's always interesting for folks who work in higher ed, to me, like learning like what our stories were. Cause obviously it is, again, like you kind of find the career either through that experience of like being like a student leader, or like usually like an early job out of undergrad. But I guess any memories of like, maybe it was like the stuff you were learning in the classroom or other stuff that you did, like that still, is resonating with you either like personally or professionally, like any memories or experiences, I guess, from back then.
Yeah. First of all, hindsight is 2020, and of course, I don't think I'm alone. And when I look back at my undergrad, I would do, I would do a lot of things differently
Mm-hmm.
if I knew then what I know now, and I would probably be a lot more engaged and take advantage of a lot more opportunities. But one thing that comes to mind, it's kind of a funny thing. I do a lot of work now on video, and I use videos in my online teaching, and I help faculty to use videos in their online teaching, and I'm writing a book about how teachers can use video in their teaching. And I actually started at Syracuse. The reason I chose Syracuse was for their broadcast journalism program. And my original plan was to be a news anchor. I had been hooked into the media program in my high school and had the most tremendous learning experiences my junior and senior year. We were basically, by senior year, we sort of had our own little television show within the high school, and our teacher was amazing and really allowed us to be creative. And I thought that was what I wanted to do for my career, was to be on the news. And so I researched colleges that had great journalism programs and ended up at Syracuse in their Newhouse program. And within, I would say, about 6 weeks, I realized that it wasn't the right fit for me. It was very different than my high school experience, which had been a lot more collaborative. It felt a lot more competitive. It's a great program, but it just wasn't the right fit for me. So I changed my major to undecided. And I've had mixed feelings about that, like wondering if I maybe kind of gave up on that too easily. But I realized a few years ago that, I'm still doing that work in my online teaching and my work with faculty. I'm an introvert, but for some reason I really enjoy being on camera and creating videos, and it's a real creative outlet for me. It helps me to connect to my students. So it really is a positive, collaborative process for me in the way that I do it now. So I was kind of excited when I realized that, because I was kind of like, oh, like, would I have gone to Syracuse if not for that? And, did I waste that time? And I realize now that, no experiences are wasted. And there's a lot of ways to express our talents in the world. I think we're often, drawn to the most obvious. And I thought, oh, I love being on camera. I must have to, I'm going to be a news anchor. That seemed like the most obvious path. But there are so many ways that I could use video in my work. Online teaching happens to be one of them. So that was a good learning experience for me. And I'm glad I had that experience, and it ended up working out, and that I'm still doing it today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And we have that in common. I did like radio, TV stuff in high school as well.
Oh.
And yeah, it was a very educational experience, just like playing around with all the like semi-pro, there's like a little studio and like doing all the different cameras and just like filming stuff like offsite. But it's funny that, because like when you were saying it and I was thinking back, it's like, for whatever reason, I like never considered doing that as like my major in college or anything. Why, I don't know, but it's similarly like, maybe like subconsciously I always perceived it as sort of like a hobby, like that I just enjoy doing it. And I enjoy like, I took some like film classes in terms of just like, talking about movies or whatever. But then now like you doing a podcast and like just kind of living in the space, it's like still scratching that itch, I guess. But yeah, so it's neat just reflecting and like kind of making sense of just like, yeah, like was this a complete waste? Should I have done it all differently? It's like, you know what? No, it was meaningful. Yeah. It was fun. I got a lot out of it, and just kind of taking those lessons where you can take them. But well, I guess now, that kind of brings you, back to the present in your current work, and, you're doing a lot of different things, like you said. And I guess like, this is where I guess we can dig in maybe like with specifically like what you enjoy most about the different things that you do, and then kind of an and or of like working remotely obviously is a unique experience as well. So like, what do you enjoy most about your current work? Like what's keeping you motivated and inspired, and what keeps you kind of like, I guess for me too, I'd be curious, like connected to a greater higher ed community, because I think I do a couple of different things, but I also really try to value like the time I have in person with other like higher ed folks. So I don't know, just like your current world and how you kind of make sense of it and make the most of it and kind of thrive and stay like motivated, like, what you're enjoying about it.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. So I think one of the things that I enjoy most about what I'm doing now is that I kind of created it myself. So, I think a lot of us, and I used to do this have thought in terms of job descriptions, and I think that is shifting. And we live in a world now where we can, I don't even know if I want to use the word career. We can create a life,
Right.
the lines in my life between work and, that phrase work-life balance, like that just doesn't apply to me. So I've really been able to create a life for myself where I am doing things that I am good at and that serve the greater good. I think that might be something called purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still a work in progress there, but I'm able to really be intentional about figuring out the things that I want to invest my time in, and also constantly weaving in the other pieces of my life: wellness, time with family, my dog, reading. It's really important for me that I spend time doing those things each day. And I've been able to create that life for myself. So that is exciting for me. And I'm excited to see where that takes me. I would also say that what got me into higher ed was this idea that it could transform people's lives for the better. I started out, like I said, working in a college access program. So I worked with students who, what we might call non-traditional students, I now call them new traditional students, many of them, first generation college students. And I believed then, and I believe now, that when we help people gain access to college and we create pathways for success, that it is transformational. So higher ed has always been sort of social justice work for me, and it continues to be. And I've been able to, again, weave that into all of the work that I do, whether it's working with students in my teaching, whether it's working with faculty, whether it's writing. I hope that I'm able to keep that at the forefront, that I'm doing this work so that people can live happier and healthier lives. In terms of working remotely, some of the most obvious benefits to that are that I have a ton of flexibility. I make time most mornings to get to the gym. I wasn't able to do that when I was working, in a typical 9 to 5. I can take my dog for a walk in the middle of the day. I have many, many pairs of sweatpants that are my work uniform. So, I probably take that for granted sometimes, how awesome that flexibility is. But it really is pretty awesome that I can, meet those personal needs and have that sort of relaxed atmosphere. As I mentioned, I'm an introvert, so I can find a balance between taking that time that I need for myself, but also I'm absolutely very intentional, increasingly so this year, about connecting with people online through LinkedIn, through Twitter, and then taking those conversations that maybe are happening on LinkedIn, for example, into a Zoom chat or whatever, which I've been doing more this year. So it's been really cool. 2019, for some reason, I've been really building a lot of positive connections with people that I've never met in person. So that balances out, some of that isolation, which is one of the downsides of working remotely. But it's been really fun to explore that and be a little bit more intentional about it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I still feel like, it's not even been a year for me yet, so I think I'm still in the process of figuring it out, but I do have the self-awareness of those kind of areas that I need to address, of making kind of mindful, intentional outreach and just getting out of the house to do things and those sort of things.
Yes,
I've
you
really
have to leave the house.
yeah, I walk my dog and I do certain things, and I think, there's the comfort and just the ease, and you don't have to worry about commuting and those sort of things. And just you can be the flexibility comes with if I need to go to an appointment or do something, I can do that and then just kind of pick up where I left off. No worries. And then also just be productive when I am the most productive versus you got to commute and there's stress with that. And you got to 9 to 5 in the office every day, no matter what. It can be let me pop on, at different hours, cause I slept in or whatever. I can really dictate my own schedule and be productive when it makes sense for me and be comfortable and, have all my stuff here and all that. So, so it's definitely a huge value. And then the idea that it's not as if I had to sacrifice, it's the same for you. You didn't have to sacrifice any professional goals. You're still doing meaningful work in the field that you want to work in and all that. So, yeah, like I mean, just I really hope to like I believe it is already happening. I hope it continues to happen. I hope more people can kind of partake if they so choose. It's certainly not for everybody, but yeah, so that's awesome. Well, I guess you identified as a higher ed geek, which is great. I appreciate as many other folks adopting that moniker as possible. So I guess if it is like anything that you're really connecting with, professionally or just more personally that you feel like are just kind of informing your kind of existence as a human or your work or anything like that, that maybe isn't like directly higher ed related, but yeah, like what's capturing your attention right now? Like what are you geeking out about currently? And if it's like new stuff or things that you're revisiting or anything like that, like stuff you do for fun, whatever way you kind of want to take that.
Yeah. So I've been diving into the word that's coming to mind is relationships. So I've become increasingly curious about the role of the faculty-student relationship in online learning. And I've noticed that since I started teaching online, and I started teaching online in 2006, I knew then sort of intuitively that the relationships that I built with my students were critical to their success. And it felt like I've also taught face-to-face and hybrid and dual enrollment, but it felt particularly important in those online classes to be intentional about building those relationships. And in the past few years, I've started to, notice more and more research coming out showing that the faculty-student relationship in the online learning environment is pretty important. So I'm very curious about that. If folks love podcasts, another podcast, it's called Hidden Brain. I listened to this a few months ago, and it really had me geeking out. I think it's called Birds. The episode is called Birds of a Feather, and it's about the research of a guy named Hunter Gelbach. He is an educational researcher. I think he's at Stanford, but maybe moving over to Johns Hopkins. And the study was about how when students and teachers know something about the things they have in common, interests, that everyone is generally more successful in their learning experience or their teaching experience. So they studied classrooms where teachers and students knew what those common interests were and where they didn't. And in the first classroom, they were really intentional about sharing those interests between students and teachers. And it was what was really exciting about that, and when I heard about it on the podcast, it was particularly important for marginalized students to close that achievement gap. So that really got me thinking about how we build relationships with students in online learning. And one of the ways that I do that is through video. But I'm really curious about how, I have this sense, I've just had a feeling in the past year that online education is sort of moving into a new era. I've been in online education since 2006. So I kind of came in when it was sort of still a bit in its infancy. And I've really felt like an energy or a movement, and I'm excited about what's to come. And I think one of the things that I want to contribute to this next phase is to support faculty-student relationships in the online learning environment. And so I've been reading about symbiotic relationships out of the fields of biology and ecology. And one of the words that is really guiding me recently is this concept of mutualism. And in a symbiotic relationship, mutualism means both organisms benefit. So I've been thinking a lot about that. The contrast would be parasitism, where one organism benefits and the other is harmed. So I'm really curious about how, mutualism or that idea could be woven into our work in online education to think about how faculty and student relationships are built, and also to focus on the interdependence of student success and faculty success. That's another big one for me. I think we talk a lot about student success in higher education, rightfully so. I'm a student success evangelist, but I'm also really curious and passionate about faculty success, because I think I don't think you can have one without the other. I don't think you can have student success if you don't focus on student success. And I also think faculty success matters in its own right. So yeah, those are what I'm geeking out about and reading about and writing about right now.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, because I think it's like, in my experience, there can be obviously so many other people that are there as support and resources for a student in an online course, an online program. But by default, like the faculty member is the one like that they kind of have to interact with on a regular basis, and so it may be like one of like maybe their only or their most kind of salient kind of conduit to be connected and feel like part of a community and feel supported and kind of all those things. And especially for the folks who we would want to provide access to, and have them have that feeling and feel kind of empowered and encouraged to persist and all those sort of things. So it's definitely really important. I think it's something that it's like it just doesn't get as much attention, or it's not as much kind of not as loud in the kind of the zeitgeist of higher ed, especially in like digital education. There's a lot of stuff that we can do to kind of track student performance and address it and all those sort of things. But you must go too far in that direction, and then you're neglecting, I think, another important part of the piece, like you said, with faculty success. And because I think it's also like it shouldn't be surprising, because I think that's a fairly understood kind of metrics of success for like on-ground students. Like faculty interaction is like a positive thing. That just that's, I think, pretty straightforward. But I guess it's the assumption that when students are in an online course, they're not looking for that or something. Like there's some of these like some of this residue that I think we continually have to like wash away. I have a lot of like stigma or just sort of like myths about digital education. So I feel like that is one part of it, is like, oh, they don't need to be like feeling like they're part of a community. That's why they chose to go online. It's like, no, they still like chose this institution for a reason, and they want to, they can, there's the potential, the capacity for them to have a lot of affinity for that institution. And I think a faculty member can play a pretty big role in that. Like I said, is kind of one of the few kind of like required or, repeated continual touch points that they have throughout their program. So, and it sounds like even just like minimal rapport building, like you're saying, just like feeling like something you have in common with the faculty, like is beneficial. Like it obviously doesn't have to be like they're meeting one-on-one every week with every single student. It's like, no, even just like bringing yourself into your classes and like having a personal touch to it. Like it sounds like that's what's valuable, I guess.
And I would add to that, one of the most common things that I hear from my students when I'm teaching online, and have been for years, is that they'll say, I didn't know if I was going to even get a chance to talk to my professor, or I didn't know if I would get to know you at all. And it was, it was so exciting for me, and it improved my experience so much that I got to know you. So I've been hearing that for years. So it was really exciting for me to, I'm starting to see research that supports the role of that faculty-student relationship in student achievement and retention, course completion, persistence, all those good things. And, the other thing I would say is that nobody spends more time with our students than faculty. So we've got this huge resource there, and I don't think we always acknowledge it. And that's not to discount the good work that's going on in other places, but that just seems like a logical conclusion to me, that we have the folks who are spending the most time with students have a lot of power to influence them and support them.
Yeah. So it sounds like, just bringing themselves to the classes and like video and personal touch and all of that. And then just like probably just making themselves available. Like you said, like the students may not feel like the faculty are willing to make time or can make time or any of it, but like really, as many do, sort of in person, of this whole, kind of open door policy, of just being like, please come in, like office hours and those sort of things. Is like, just make sure you're also making yourself available, like digitally, like people can book appointments and you have like just standing digital office hours, or just like, offer that readily as an option if a student, seems to have a lot of questions or something. Like just changing a little bit of that sort of, because obviously it's super easy just to send a bunch of emails or something, or just kind of, I don't know, on either side assume it's like, well, they can't make time or they don't want to make time or any of those sort of things. But any effort you make in that direction, I think, is just going to pay dividends so much, like you're saying. So
there's so many things we can do. There are so many things we can do to, connect with students and to build that support system and that relationship. So, and a lot of them are so simple. They're just a matter of, they're things like telling students you can do this and I'm here to help you. That's one of my big mantras is you can do this and I'm here to help you. And it makes a world of difference in students' lives. So a lot of these things aren't terribly time consuming or complicated. And we've got a lot of options for building that relationship.
Yeah. It's just kind of like changing people's habit. Like once they get into the flow, I think it, would be a lot more like second nature, just the language and the availability and those sort of things. Yeah, so that's great. Well, I guess, and I love that you're taking inspiration from like biology and just like other podcasts that obviously aren't like solely directly like higher ed related. Just certain episodes might be just broadly more education related. So, I mean, is there anything else that specifically you'd want to recommend the show notes of things that you're like reading, watching, and or listening to? As long or as short of a list as you might want to give there, but
sure,
perhaps it's just like one of each or something. But
yeah, oh gosh, well, one of I'm going to recommend a couple books, and then I'm going to probably kick myself for just saying a couple. But one of the ones I would recommend is called The College Fear Factor by Dr. Rebecca Cox. I think this should be required reading for everyone working in higher education. And Dr. Cox did a research study of first-year students and their teachers, folks teaching the first-year English comp course at a community college. And it's incredibly insightful about how we can best support first-generation college students. And it is something I use in my work daily. The other book that I would recommend is a book called Brain Rules by John Medina. I'm very interested in the intersection between neuroscience and education. Some of us call it brain-based teaching, neuroeducation, mind-brain education science, but that's a growing field that I would definitely encourage people to check out. There's a lot of good books on it. Another one's called Neuroteach, but Medina's was one of the first that I read, and it really helped to give me an understanding of how the brain works, which is, I think, really important to being a good teacher. One of the tenets of brain-based teaching is that the brain is the primary organ of learning. So it's important to know some of the fundamentals about how it works. And that's not something I think most of us were taught about in our, education about education. So I would definitely recommend that for folks who want to improve their teaching and learn a bit more about the brain. Very
good. And then, yeah, I guess it is really related to the other podcast you mentioned, Hidden Brain. Because, yeah, I mean, there is like a biological element to like just how human beings learn, but then like certainly just other, perhaps like cultural factors and other stuff. But like that is, I think, an area where people might not have gotten as much sort of covered in like graduate programs or whatnot. So,
yeah,
very cool. When I guess do you listen to any other like podcasts that are like education related or anything? I don't know if that's kind of part of your podcast diet or if you're a big podcast listener.
I am a podcast listener. I'm actually, so one of my roles is that I'm a writer for women in higher education. And I'm actually working on a piece for for next month's edition about my podcast routine and the podcast that I listen to and how it's loosely titled How I Pod. So, yes, I love podcasts. So if folks check out Women in Higher Ed, you might be able to read it there, but I'll just, I'll be very honest that my favorite podcast is Oprah's Super Soul podcast, and I just can't get enough. So not higher ed related, but it's certainly, I think, the art of being human is something that's important for those of us who work or study in higher ed as well. And that's something that's a big part of that podcast.
Yeah. I mean, it's very people-centered work. So, yeah, so that's a good one. Yeah. Cause all mine are like, yeah, it's like all over the place. But yeah, they end up being like kind of current events, like news, or just sort of like the weird kind of background or context. Cause like I was a history major in undergrad. So just I love understanding why and how things happen. So there's a lot of like good podcasts that always kind of like dig in really deeply with like, a certain piece of news. But, So, yeah, because when, like, as of the recording of this, if you're posting it for next month, I believe it might be out, or people can check out the site and make sure that they're keeping an eye out for it. But great. Well, yeah, we'll link out to all those things. And then, yeah, we'll wrap up the episode here on the optimistic note that I always love ending on, of what is something, or, some things that you are looking forward to in your life, job, and or the world. So any or all of those categories, just something that you're looking forward to.
I'm really looking forward to July. I've been, I teach online, and I've been teaching through the summers. My best guess is since around 2008. So we've always been able to travel a bit in the summer and spend some time down the Jersey Shore, which is where I'm from. But I've always been teaching, for a lot of that. And, I'd get up first thing in the morning and do some grading and then head to the beach. And I'm not complaining about that, but I haven't had time off in the summer for a very, very long time. So I've been very intentional about hopefully setting some time aside this summer to actually be, one of the benefits of working remotely and online and having this sort of freelance career is that I have a ton of flexibility, but I'm also kind of always working. So, I would, anybody who's interested in this path, that's important to know. So I'm going to hopefully be taking, I am going to be taking some time off this summer. And I think I'm going to try to just sort of relax and do nothing and spend time with my family. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm also really excited about the return of Beverly Hills 90210. So yeah, I think that is in the summer as well. So I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. So that's sort of a pop culture thing that I'm excited about. So that will be something I'm looking forward to as well.
Yeah, so some good fun stuff coming up. It's great. We are currently living in, I think, the heyday of 90s nostalgia and reboots and revivals and, revisited. So yeah, a lot of good stuff. So great. Well,
I'm here for it all. Here for it all.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, I think some of them, it's just like really interesting, like storytelling where it's like, I don't think anybody needed it, but it can be really interesting, just like characters say, like, yeah, well, where are they like 20 years later? Or like, how, just like, I don't know. It has to be obviously done well, and I think it has been done well in a few different instances. But yeah, it's just fascinating that that's kind of like very much where we are. Like for entertainment right now, is a lot of those like revisited, where it's not just like like we're rebooting and it's like a new story or whatever. It's like, no, we're literally picking up like as much time as it's been since the last episode of that show. Like we're gonna bring it back for another season or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, fascinating. Great. Well, I really appreciate you, making time to connect here and talk about all the good work that you're doing and just sharing all that you did. So we'll have ways to connect with you and all that you mentioned in the show notes as usual. But yeah, just thanks for your time. And I'm sure we'll be connecting on social and Twitter and whatnot again here soon.
Thank you so much, Dustin. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you having me on your show.
This podcast is part of the Connect EDU podcast network, bringing together diverse voices in the higher ed community. Check us out on Twitter at ConnectEDUPod or at connectedu.network. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.